From our studios this week in Los Angeles and Tampa, this is Green Tagged Theme Park in 30. I'm Philip. He is Scott Swenson of Scott Swenson Career Development. And on Green Tagged, we break down the top theme park news each week and explain why it matters to business professionals. And this week, we are covering the third act in the Louvre drama, which is what I will be calling it from now on.
There we go. Yeah, it's so funny. So we've reported on challenges. I think challenges is fair. That the Louvre has been facing, and this is the Paris Louvre, not the Abu Dhabi Louvre. But yeah, it's it's become very dramatic.
It is so great. It's so French also. I mean, I'm sure it's like because I like it, but it's one of those things where I'm like, I don't know if this would happen, in America, definitely, but.
The way things have been going in America, who knows what would happen in America? We just don't know.
That is true. That's also true. That's a good point, Scott. So
we don't know that.
In the last several episodes, we talked about the background for this. Which background of this?
Okay, so here you go, Philip. I'll let you recap. Act 1, the Louvre.
Yes, Act 1. Act 1 is that after the pandemic, there was revenge travel, and also due to more interest in international locations that are not necessarily the USA, you have seen a spike in visitor attendance at the Louvre. And we're not talking like 5 extra people. We are talking double the capacity that these rooms were meant for. Mm-hmm. We are talking 20,000 people trying to see the Mona Lisa every day. We're talking just a lot, like an incredible amount of what the infrastructure is not meant to contain. And so that was sort of Act 1. Act 2 was that there was a leaked memo, quote unquote leaked memo from the director of the Louvre, and it leaked out to the press, but it was from the director being written to the government. And basically the director outlined all the terrible things that was there's damage to the infrastructure, that the bathrooms, the staff just can't keep up the upkeep and also make it habitable for people and all this kind of stuff. And then at that point, we covered the plan, and Macron had a plan, right? The plan was basically, we talked about it, where it seemed like politically he didn't want to try and appropriate money for the Louvre. And so what he did politically was basically announced there was going to be a tax on visitors, a fee to visit them, extra fees to visit things that residents would be exempt from, and then they would collect those over the next 6 years ish and use them to renovate the building. And then what happened was now we're to Act 3, which is that the staff did not like that. So basically they went on strike, which is great. I just think it's great from it's a bad situation. I think it's a legitimate way to kind of help or to bring attention back to it. But basically they just said, we can't wait 6 years for help, basically. And they said that they called his plan, they say the 700 to 800 million euro renovation plan was hypocritical, and it masks a deeper crisis because while Macron is investing in new entrances and exhibit spaces, the Louvre's annual operating subsidies from the French state have shrunk by more than 20% over the past decade, even as I mentioned, visitor numbers have soared. So they're kind of pointing to a systemic problem, which is that there hasn't been investment to match the amount of additional attendance that is coming in, and that they can't wait 6 years.
And in fact, they have reduced the support as the attendance goes up. They're not even holding status quo, and they're not adding more financial support for additional visitors. They're actually going down. They're supplying less financial support for additional visitors.
Yep. And so they're basically saying that the chronic understaffing and the situations there with the ticket agents and the security, just everything is just untenable, is what they're saying. And if you look at the pictures in the piece that from the Associated Press, the lines and these, it is it is crazy. To see that, it does look really bad. And so I'm not sure the reality, of course, we're not there on the ground, but the pictures are look pretty bad. But so, yeah, the Louvre temporarily closed because the staff went on strike, and whether or not it's going to reopen or reopen in portions is TBD, as of when we're recording this, and then to see how the long term stuff will work on it. But the AP brought it into context for that area, that across Southern Europe, that this is not the only anti-tourism protests happening, that there were thousands rallied in Venice and Libsyn and beyond, denouncing an economic model they say displaces locals and erodes city life. In Barcelona, activists sprayed tourists with water pistols, a theatrical bid to cool down runaway tourism. So that is, we talked about that last time also, because Japan, of course, we had covered previously how Japan was like putting up new fences and kind of like having to put up signage and do things that they didn't normally have to do because the visitors didn't have the same sense of care that the locals did for some of their historic properties, and that they're putting capacity limits and prices. And so this seems to be sweeping across a lot of the areas. We're not seeing it here in the US, or I have not seen anything about any of it here in the US, but
well, and there are many countries who are saying don't come to the U.S. right now. So
yes.
so there's
Yes.
that.
Yes. There's that. But it is an interesting thing. We talked about the trend last time where Scott and I think, advocated that tourism writ large is a good thing, but infrastructure, especially what Scott said about creature comforts, is also a good thing. And it's definitely about having the balance. And I think we as tourism professionals can't take for granted, I think, that all of the folks in these situations also know, they're not necessarily tourism professionals that have the same background that we do. And, or even if you think about Scott's background in managing amount of people for a large facility, like, you don't necessarily have that if you're the guy who's in charge of putting up, the tickets and stuff at Mount Fuji. Like, that's not necessarily in your background. So we talked about last time how that could be part of it. But this is definitely an escalation, and I just think it's funny.
Well, and it's interesting because I think that, you're right. This is creature comfort, but this is creature comfort both for the guests and for the employees and for the team members.
Yep.
That has gotten to the point where it needs to be fixed, and it needs to be fixed sooner rather than later. Based on what we've read, again, as you said, we're not boots on the ground, so we cannot advocate for this based on first person experience. This is sort of trying to read between the lines, I guess, and figure out, what is really going on. Suffice to say that it was, to me, the thing that is most interesting about the Louvre specifically is it is, and I think Philip alluded to it, it is, the current plan is a whitewash to cover up the fact that they have been quietly and slowly reducing funding. Now, the next question is, if the Louvre is so popular, what's happening to all of the money generated by that popularity? Is the business model such that is what they need just to keep their head above water? Because if that's the case, there's another problem. I having worked with both profits and nonprofits, I am a firm believer, and there are nonprofit organizations that will disagree with me, but I am a firm believer that a nonprofit should operate as though they are for-profit and use their nonprofit status to continue to use it towards R&D, to continue to develop, to continue to grow. And I will say, based on my experience in working with nonprofits, if you're looking for grant money, not necessarily government grant money, but grant money from sponsorship and from corporations and that sort of thing, corporations want to see that their money, their investment, is going to be utilized to its best possible outcome. So they want to see that you know how to run your organization. They want to see that you are focused as much on the basic infrastructure as you are the sexy new exhibit or the sexy new ride or whatever that is that's going to come up in the future. So there is a balance here. I know you are thrilled by the fact that they've gone on strike, and you think that's really fun. Having spent enough time on the other side of that, I think this is a very sad situation because basically, and maybe I'm wrong, but what I'm hearing, because we've seen the leaked memo in Act 2, the management of the Louvre are stuck between a rock and a hard place. They don't have the funding that they need primarily from the government, and they have very disgruntled staff. So, when we say quote unquote leaked, that kind of makes sense that got out.
Yep.
So that it would light a fuse.
Yep.
It would force some hand. It did force some hand, which was the let's do taxes. Let's basically add tariffs to people visiting the Louvre,
Yes.
and we'll see how that pans out. And the idea of we can't wait 6 years, that's where I think there's a little bit of a questioning. Would it be possible, for example, for the government to reevaluate the budget for next year so that they could start getting that funding in and then utilize the additional tourist tax, for lack of a better description, the additional tourist tax to then bring that money back into their coffers so that we can get the apparently very, very much needed improvements made so that the guest experience continues to be something special, continues to be something desirable. And I'm sure that there's an argument. People are sitting out there going, but wait, they've already got people breaking down the doors. They've already got twice capacity. Why is that even a concern? Because eventually the pendulum will swing back the other way. Eventually people will go, we went to the Louvre. It sucked. It was horrible.
Yeah.
We didn't get to, we got to one gallery. We had to wait 2 hours to see the Mona Lisa. And even then it was across the room of crowded people because the Mona Lisa, kids, is not that big.
People are saying that. There's some people in the story actually quoted that are being like, what you see when you go into the Mona Lisa is elbows and cell phones. You don't see the Mona Lisa, right?
And a postage stamp on the other side of the room. Yeah.
So I'm wondering, what do you think about changing the capacity? Because apparently there is currently a capacity as in like a whatever. Like, I think they've set it. I think 30,000 is already a limit. Like they've already set a limit on daily attendance.
Okay.
I guess my question is, what about dropping that to where it's actually supposed to be, which is 15, and then just like dynamic pricing in a way, right? Where you're just saying, look, like it's 15.
So the Disneyland model.
Yeah, just be like it's max 15, and
you get
there are peak times where it's more expensive. Like why not in this case, because of the urgency of the situation, why not put that effect, and then that could affect real change immediately for the staff members. And there's got to be, I'm not sure about how it works in France, but like, if the room was built for X and you're putting Y in it, it seems like there's also a danger just in the amount of people in the room for fire code and for evacuation. Right. So, I mean, it seems to me like those things I'm curious about, like why, if they already have a capacity limit or, a restriction on the number of tickets sold for a day, why is it so high? And why don't they just take that down? Is it, yeah.
I have no idea what that number is based on. I don't know. I don't know whether that is, it was set at the first number because they felt that would make a good guest experience. Then when they realized we have people knocking down the doors and people get, if you let 15,000 in and 30,000, you were letting in 30,000 and then you cut it down to 15,000, then you have 15,000 complaints. So is that more negative? It's all, one of the things that if you get nothing else from this show, one of the things that I want you to remember is there is no silver bullet. There's no magic bullet that is just one way to go and it makes everything right. It's always a balancing act. It is always a balancing act. So is there going to be more complaint, more negative publicity generated from reducing the number down and increasing the price, whether that's through dynamic pricing or just, we're going to let half as many people in and we're going to double the price? That's the simple math solution. I like simple math because I'm not very good at it. But that's the simple math solution. Is that going to create more negativity than letting everybody in, but making their experience less than it should be? I don't know the answer, but these are all the kinds of questions that they need to be having right now. Because, even because I was in Paris 10 years ago, 12 years ago, and we didn't go to the Louvre because it was, even back then, it was too crowded. This is pre-COVID. Even
Yeah.
then, we couldn't get in day of, and I was only there for a day because I was on a cruise ship, but we couldn't get in. So we opted not to go to the Louvre. So this is not a new problem. That's the thing that I think is frustrating. This is not new. This is something, as you know, even in the short time that we've been reporting it, it's already now had 3 very dramatic acts. And it's one of those situations that has been going on for at least 10 years.
Yep.
So I like some of the solutions. I mean, I'm not opposed to the tourist tax. I'm really not. I think because one of the things that we have to recognize, and I think this goes back to some of the other anti-tourism stories, as attractions, as organizations, yes, we have to generate revenue and we have to draw tourism because that will help our hoteliers and our restaurateurs and the local mall, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But we also have to be cognizant of the community and the neighborhood that we operate in, because the moment you knock that relationship to the ground, then you've got all kinds of other trouble. So, you know, to just put on a flat tax for everybody, we're just going to do an amusement tax or a museum tax or whatever you want to call it that applies to everyone, then you're not recognizing that the locals who have supported you for all these years are now getting their hands slapped because of something that's completely out of their control, which is the additional tourism.
So I think what you're saying a little bit is that Macron's plan had elements of it that were good because it was only taxing the people who are not local. But on the flip side, it was too long because of that reason, because because it's not taking funds immediately and it's doing other things, it's taking too long. And so therefore there was no operational adjustment.
Correct.
And so I think you're saying both things need to happen.
They're too far down the well to have a 6-year plan. They need an immediate fix and then a 6-year recovery.
Yeah, they need both. So he needs to work with the local operators to be like, how can we adjust this, but also make a 6-year plan?
Think of it as taking out a mortgage on a home. You know, there are different cultures buy homes in different ways. Some cultures live with their parents or live in very small homes until such time as they can buy a home outright. So it takes them 20 years before they can buy a house. More common in the United States is the concept of mortgage. We will get someone to buy the house up front, in essence, and then we'll pay back the mortgage company with an interest rate. To me, because this sounds like it's already gone way too far down the well, to me that seems like the only solution is to basically say, okay, here's our bailout money, and we're going to use these taxes or these budgetary changes to pay us back for solving the solution now.
Yep. Yeah, if you think of it like a business, they should be able to get a loan based off of the current demand, right? Basically.
Well, or just rebudget. Yeah. I mean, I make that sound overly simple, but just reevaluate the budget. And is there a way, when one house is on fire, you don't put water on the entire neighborhood. Let's figure out a way to take all of the water that's being spread over the other organizations and really focus it in. Now, will that upset other organizations? Yes, short term. But that's why I say there's no one. I sit here very smugly and say, well, this is what they should do. But there is no one solid answer. These are options that they should be discussing and hopefully find something that works best for their specific situation.
Yep. Well, moving on, our second story here is also an update for something we covered previously, which is the Netflix houses. So previously we talked about how, I don't think we talked about this for years, I think, about how the concept of Netflix, basically Netflix over the past many years has been experimenting with in-person experiences. We know that obviously there's horror nights and there's those part where they've worked with partners, but there's also where they've made their own experiences. And mostly these are pop-up stores. The ones I've been to were mostly the Stranger Things pop-up stores, where it is a themed experience, but it's like a themed shopping experience, right? And so earlier, or I don't remember when, but whenever this was announced, we talked about it on the show, and it was the concept that they're making kind of like an FEC, basically, which is called Netflix House. And we weren't sure what it was going to look like at the time, but we assumed that it was going to be a collection of these experiences because they already have tested them effectively in other places, and just bringing them together makes sense. And so news came out this week that I think that's sort of what's happening, but I'm still not clear. Basically, Netflix House will open in 2025 in Philadelphia and Dallas, followed by a third venue in 2027 in Las Vegas. The Philadelphia location will include attractions based off Wednesday and One Piece, and the Dallas counterpart will feature Stranger Things and Squid Games. Netflix announced the lineups on June 17th, so it was just this week. And there are pictures out that kind of show sort of blueprints or mock-ups, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
And from the mock-ups, I can't really tell because
I just pulled it up and I'm looking at it going, oh, this is a little tricky.
yeah. So I'm not sure. It looks cool. It definitely looks cool. It looks large, and of course these are larger than they were previously. The only other interesting things is an article here from Attractions Magazine points out that both of these venues are in 100,000 square foot department stores at two highly frequented malls. So we liked the story originally. I'm just unsure of what it's going to actually be like. And I still can't tell from these renderings, even though we have IPs. I think I like the idea. I don't want to go on like a huge rant, but I was talking to somebody recently.
Oh, go
this
ahead,
week.
Philip. No one's going to stop you. It's all right.
I don't know if it's a rant. I don't know if it's commentary. So to put it in context, and I was explaining this to somebody recently as I was ranting about my low YouTube ad revenue, but I was saying that basically last month, for the first time ever, streaming surpassed cable and TV viewership in America, which I think, depending on your generation, you're probably surprised at on either end of it, right? You're probably surprised at that. And, so it's interesting that what pushed it over the edge was retired folks, older folks moving from TV and cable into watching YouTube. And YouTube has now become a more watched streamer than Netflix. And I think many times people don't realize that YouTube is a streamer in the same way that Netflix is. It really is. And people, they watch YouTube on their TVs. And this is what is pushing this number over. And so all of the places we talk about in theater entertainment are kind of in this battle, even though we don't realize it, right? Comcast is in this battle because as people cut cables, it impacts its bottom line, which impacts its ability to get capital to put into new theme parks and all that. That's why they've been rushing to diversify, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But Netflix and YouTube are also all interwound into this. And to me, I think that Netflix, in a way, YouTube is doing to Netflix what Netflix did to cable TV, because YouTube, the cost of content on YouTube is less than half of what Netflix spends for its content. And we've already talked about how Netflix is spending less than other people. Right. So it's this huge race to the bottom. And it's because effectively YouTube only pays for content if that content makes money. And then even when they pay for it, it's only an advertising split. So you could have a creator like us, even on this channel, where we are making years of content for YouTube, but we don't get paid for it because you have to reach a certain threshold, and that threshold is pretty high. So there's that base level. But then even when we do get paid, we only get a percentage. So basically it's like someone going out and saying, you're going to produce the content and I'm going to sell ad space on it, but I'm only going to give you money if I sell ad space. And so then you're making this asset for years. So it's just a much cleaner, they're making the business model is just entirely different versus Netflix that has to invest every year in new content, or they lose subscribers or whatever. They have to spend the money. So I think you're going to see that erosion of Netflix's base, in that like Netflix is just a worse business model when people are just, when so many people are willing to make so much content for basically for free or for very little money on YouTube, then that puts Netflix in a bad place because they have to pay for their content, unlike YouTube. Okay. That's the background. So similar, I think, to what Comcast is doing is Netflix probably sees the writing on the wall, and they're like, oh, our business model is eroding because just YouTube can scale infinitely, basically, and Netflix cannot. And yes, while there's always going to be the appetite for HBO, there's still HBO. And that's the other problem, is that they're almost crunched from both angles, right? And so I think this, similar to what Comcast is doing, is a play at diversification. They look at Disney, they look at Universal, and they say, oh, we also have incredible IP, and look at Disney's flywheel that makes them so much money, and the theme parks have a better valuation than Disney Plus, and they hear everything that's going on there, and they're probably thinking, what if we made theme parks and we made a flywheel based off of our good IPs? And the same thing, we could invest less in better IPs, just like Disney talked about with Marvel, less in better IPs. And then if we had other forms of revenue, that would lead to better revenue. And if we could attack markets that are less that have less competition, like they're not going into Los Angeles or Orlando, right? They're going into places that
Dallas
do not
and
Dallas and Philadelphia, right, which have great markets and I assume great viewership numbers, great percentage of viewers, but also they're not competing with the Disney or Universal, except for the kids resort maybe in Dallas. So I think that's what this is. This is a larger competitive play that is about diversifying their revenue before it is too late, in the same way that Comcast is also trying to diversify before it's too late. And I think it's a very similar model even to some of the stuff that we've seen from Universal, in that they're trying to make an FEC of some sort of thing where they're collecting interactive elements based off of the different IPs that they have. And as I mentioned before, how well or not this will do is going to really come down to the execution, just like with Horror Unleashed, right? It's like they've shown that they're putting it in a place that has high foot traffic natively, and then they've chosen very popular IPs like One Piece, incredibly popular.
Mhm.
We talked about this last time when we talked about the Universal Fan Fest nights. So they've chosen popular IPs and they put them in locations to gather foot traffic. I'm not sure what else they could do. Really, they've set a really good stage. Now it comes down to the execution and their team and their research. And Disney was not built in a day. That's the other thing. We didn't talk about it yet, but the concept of epic universe, theme parks take like a decade to really get into the groove of what the park is going to become and flesh out all the experiences. And I'm not sure that Universal or Netflix understands that there's a time. Anyway, I'm done. Scott, what do you think?
What I think is interesting. No, I agree with a lot of what you said. I think what I think is interesting about this particular story is, they're going, first of all, they're utilizing these old anchor stores, quite honestly.
Yep.
They're going in and they're probably getting the space for pennies on the dollar, because these anchor stores used to be what pulled people into these malls. And King of Prussia Mall in Philly is huge, or was.
It's huge, yeah.
It was at one time.
And it's iconic too, right? That's the thing.
It's iconic, yes. I've been going there. So I have family in that, or had family in that area, and I've been going to that mall since I was 6 years old. So and it used to be a destination location when I was little. So it does have that iconic status. So my guess is the mall owners are looking at it going, oh, here's a way we can pull people in, which first of all, I think is way overdue in so many other locations. I know they've tried it in different spots here and there, but finding a different way to utilize those gigantic anchor stores is, I think, going to be imperative to the brick and mortar world that we used to live in. So I think that's great. I think that's probably working to their advantage, because they're probably getting these spaces for significantly less than they used to go for as a retail, because the mall owners are thinking, here's Netflix. They're going to bring in a gazillion people, and all of our other stores are going to do well, so they can stay in their locations. I think that is important to address. I agree with you 100% on it. All comes down to execution. I'm hoping that the execution includes creature comforts, because in looking at the maps, they seem, even though they're 100,000 square feet, they seem tight, and they don't seem to have a very natural flow to them. It almost looks like a series of escape rooms is the vibe that I'm getting. Now, again, I have no idea, and I may be way off, but it almost looks like a series of escape rooms where you'll do one IP, then the next IP, and the next IP. The problem there is, what if I don't care about the second IP? So we'll see. And again, I may be wrong. There may be a central hub in this space that I'm just simply not seeing. Kind of hope there is, because I think that would be beneficial. And then finally, the thing that you hit on, that the moment we started talking about this particular story, it was exactly what I thought, is they've looked at Disney. They've seen that Disney, no matter how much they try, their streaming is not performing. The business model for their streaming business is not nearly as impactful or not nearly as profitable as their parks. So they're going, we're leaving money on the table here. And, as YouTube, which I'm sorry, content creators, I really hope that YouTube does not put Netflix out of business, because I can only watch so many reality-based content. I don't want to watch your recipe for how to make a caterpillar cake. But we need higher end production. We need higher end production than is willing to go on YouTube for free. So I'm hoping that that's not complete. I'm hoping that we do have some sense of quality. Don't misunderstand me. I have lots of content creators that I follow, Philip being one of them. Lots of content creators that I follow. But I am hoping that as we move forward, we find that there is a place in the market for all these things. And I think that Netflix is doing that by saying, we're not just the big blockbuster things on TV. We're the big blockbuster things you can walk through. We're the big blockbuster things that you can participate in, interact in, and it will continue to build a stronger audience for the content that they are indeed creating, the high-end, studio quality content that they are creating. So, well, speaking of high quality content, this is about all the high quality content we can give you this week, because our time's up. So on behalf of Philip Hernandez and myself, Scott Swenson, this is Green Tagged Theme Park in 30, and we will see you next week, unless you're going to tune in. You're one of our followers, one of our subscribers on Hinge, and then you can go watch that and listen to us rant and, find out what we really think.